Z, we wouldn't be able to truly love this act until it was passed, signed into law far away from the controversy of its passing. Fast forward 4 years, it's not because of the politics that we disdain this act. It's because of the terrible policies. According to a recent article by the Galen Institute, there have been 38 changes to Obamacare, 21 that Obama made alone, unilaterally. There have already been 6 delays in 2014. That's 2 every month this year. We'll see how we go for the rest of the year. What started as a 2,000-page bill has since turned into more than 20,000 pages of regulations. The healthcare.gov website has been a debacle, not only because of the cost, which is in excess of $1 billion, but also because it poses as a personal information security risk. Finally, now we know for sure that if you liked your health plan before, you cannot keep it. Normally, I really do like to say I told you so, not to the tune of costing American people $1.8 to $2.6 trillion over 10 years. I have not even begun to scratch the surface of this massive issue, but I'm going to let the panelists take care of that. If you have questions, please write them on the index cards on your tables, and we'll have time for question and answer after everyone has presented. First, we have a former U.S. Congressman, Philip English. He is co-chair of government relations practice at Arndt Fox LLP. His client base includes hospital, patient care facilities, and pharmaceutical companies. And while in Congress, Mr. English served 7 terms, representing Western Pennsylvania's 3rd District. He was a proponent of Medicare policy reform, reimbursement changes for hospitals, and cancer screening, and among other reforms. Former Congressman Philip English.
Thank you for that rather generous introduction. I have to tell you, it is fascinating to have spent 14 years on the Ways and Means Committee, 10 years on the Health Subcommittee, and then to come out having been through the siege of having seen the Clinton run at healthcare reform, then having seen Medicare Part D go through, and then finally leaving office at a time when healthcare reform had bubbled up. What was produced finally, to me, was stunning. And I looked at it from the perspective of serving in an organization, a law firm, Arndt Fox, that has a significant healthcare practice and actually provided the legal work for one of the suits against Obamacare. It is extraordinary to see how this law is unfolding. And what I'd like to do is maybe focus your interest on some of the things that haven't been as much a center of discussion, but are potentially enormously significant. Most of the focus so far has been on the website and the enrollment figures, but what has struck me is how one of my friends who owns a mid-sized computer services company in the suburbs of Alexandria recently had a meeting with his insurance specialist to explain to his young workers why their healthcare costs were going up by double digits. It is stunning to see the recent announcement by WellPoint that their rates next year are going up double digits. And while we were told premiums would likely come down in the range of $2,500, in fact, there's evidence to suggest so far they may be going up $2,100. I'm worried about the unseen effects when a major systemic big government change like Obamacare stresses the system with the potential to raise costs and ultimately to limit services through unintended consequences. After all, the ACA passed with no cost reforms to speak of, with little or no entitlement reform, with no change in Medicare reimbursements, and with no market or consumer reform. Above all, I was stunned that Congress passed what they called health care reform without any medical malpractice reform. The implementation, as your last speaker noted, has been delayed. 21 unilateral changes in the law, and it's stunning to consider what would have the reaction been if Mitt Romney had been president and had decided unilaterally, without action of Congress, to waive the employer mandate. I think that MSNBC would have been stunned. But there are good reasons why this White House decided to waive the employer mandate, because we've seen a report by McKinsey that when fully implemented, it's likely to lead to roughly 30% of the employees covered through that manner being dropped into the public market. There are also dramatic employment impacts likely. The CBO estimates that 2.5 million jobs will be lost by 2024 because of the incentives built into the act, 105,000 in Pennsylvania alone. Plus, with the potential impact of loss of coverage, as we would experience in the employer market, the loss of quote-unquote substandard plans that has already happened in the individual market. Think of the unintended consequences of $1 trillion in new taxes, including a health insurance tax of roughly $100 billion over 10 years, which almost certainly is going to be passed on to the consumer. A medical device tax, which Pat Toomey spent time in the Senate Finance Committee yesterday trying to get rolled back, unsuccessfully, but it was a good fight, and he'll be back. The impact of that medical device tax on innovation is almost certainly going to be negative. And then there's the cost of the pharmaceutical assessment, and Pat Toomey yesterday made an effort to try to fix the exemption for orphan drugs for rare diseases. These are going to be passed through in the form of higher costs. I'm going to keep my remarks here brief, but the fact is there need to be market reforms. There were none in this legislation. FSAs were cut. Medicare Advantage was slashed, the one program that gives people ways of customizing their Medicare, with a likelihood that half of the enrollees will be leaving over time. The insurance mandates are popular, but they're also going to drive up costs. And with Medicare cuts of $575 billion, that will have an impact on Medicare that is ultimately, by the experts, unsustainable. You're going to hear more about these unintended consequences and these unseen effects, because they're only going to become obvious over time. It's important that we track the real metrics of this law and take to the public how it's having an impact on our health care system and its strength over time. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Lisa Nancollas, is Pennsylvania State Coordinator for the Tea Party Patriots and the founder of the Mifflin County Tea Party Patriots. She is a leader of the Healthcare Compact Alliance for Pennsylvania. Lisa is also a registered nurse and a graduate of Pennsylvania State University.
Good afternoon. Thank you. In my second year of nursing school, our instructors told us that patients were supposed to be called clients. Doctors were supposed to be called providers. Healthcare relationships moved from a personal interaction to a business transaction. Then it was called an HMO. Now it's called the Affordable Care Act. Both have played a part in the erosion of our healthcare system. Both are a continuous assault on our healthcare system. The loss of freedom to choose our doctors, loss to choose freedom to choose our insurance company, and to choose what healthcare services we receive. This matters to everyone. 250,000 Pennsylvanians will be losing their coverage under this system. President Obama promised us that we could keep our doctors. But too often, we are finding that our doctors don't participate in exchange. And I just heard recently hospitals are opting out. President Obama claimed insurance would be more affordable. But really? Okay, really? Many insurance companies will not break even on the exchanges. Aetna and Coventry Healthcare canceled plans to offer insurance in the exchanges when they could not charge high enough premiums to cover the cost. And Cigna pulled out of the Pennsylvania exchanges. United Healthcare abandoned us completely and took their business to New York. Those who don't relocate will be forced to pass the skyrocketing costs onto the hardworking families of Pennsylvania. Not only is Obamacare destructive to the people, but it threatens an already struggling economy. Highmark has laid off 520 employees in Pennsylvania. And the estimated cost of Obamacare, as you have heard, will be between $3 and $7 trillion. We will be paying for this failed health plan for generations. If President Obama feels his signature health plan is so great for this country, then why is he delaying portions of this law until after the elections, leaving people in limbo and without coverage? And this is just what he claimed would not happen. Progressives have said that our health care choices are now better. But when our choices are taken away from us, when premiums and taxes skyrocket, when small businesses are suffering, and people are being laid off because of increased cost to business, is this really better? There is a solution to our health care issues. It is called the Health Care Compact. It's an interstate compact between 2 or more states. There are 3 good reasons to support the Health Care Compact. It doesn't set limits on the choice of our doctors, it doesn't dictate who provides our insurance, and it leaves us in charge of our own health care. I got into nursing over 20 years ago because I wanted to help people. Medicine was about caring, about one person caring for another. Under Obamacare, our standard is a thing of the past. However, we can bring back our high standard with the Health Care Compact in order to bring personal choice, the patient-doctor relationship, and humanity back into medicine. Thank you.
Next, we will hear from Terence Farrell, currently in his 2nd term as a county commissioner in Chester County, Pennsylvania, served as chairman of the board for 2009, 2011, 2012. In addition to his county governmental responsibilities, he is a member of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, and a number of other organizations. Terence.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I'd like to talk a little about specifically the impact of the ACA on county governments, most specifically Chester County. Many of you know that Chester County is one of the premier counties in the Commonwealth. We're located in southeast Pennsylvania, Westchester, where I live. The county seat's about a 45-minute drive from Philadelphia. 2 areas I'd like to explore with you are the impact of the ACA on our employees and then also on our prison population. Under the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, governments are treated like businesses, and with 2,200 employees, we have more than 50, so we are impacted. One of the first areas is in terms of definition. We have to cover all full-time employees, and full-time will mean anybody who worked 30 hours. But it's not 30 hours in the current year, an average of 30 hours per week, that is. In the current year, it's a look-back period. So for the first year, we look back 6 months in 14, and that will have an impact for 15. So anybody who worked an average of 30 hours per week from April to October in 2014 will be considered a full-time employee for all of 15. There'll be some transitional changes. We'll have to pay fees to the federal government of $2 a covered life, and that'll be about $4,200 per year. That started last year with a $1 per covered life, and then it'll advance to $2 per covered life in 2014, payable in 2015. There's a transitional reinsurance. In 2014, the effect is $63 a covered life per payable next year. That's $132,000. And in 2015, it reduces to $44 a covered life, payable in 2016. And in 2016, it'll decrease, but we're not sure exactly how much. The real issue for us is that in 2018, the Cadillac tax will be applied to health care that is more expensive than $10,200 per individual or $27,500 per family. And what that means is that if we offer a benefits package that is more expensive than that, we'll have to pay 40% of the excise above those numbered marks to the federal government. Right now, that impact would be $1.3 million. For Berks County, I was talking to one of the commissioners there, the impact would be about $5 million. Obviously, we're not going to be able to afford that, so we're going to have to reduce the value, the richness of our plans for employees, either suddenly, gradually through a cafeteria offering, or suddenly in 2018 by having employees who want to keep the full benefits pay that excise tax. But we've got to decrease that. And the rub for counties is this. Counties have been able to attract employees, not necessarily through salaries, but through offering good benefits. And if we have to reduce those benefits in the healthcare area, then going forward, it's going to be difficult to attract those quality employees. Let me talk about prisons briefly. When a prisoner is in our jail, and we have about just under 1,000 people in our jail on an average daily basis, they're under the county's care, and we have to pay for their health insurance or their health problems. That's about $4.7 million a year. When the ACA takes effect of a prison, the prisoners will be offered to be able to join the exchanges when they're leaving the prison, and we will have treatment counselors that will advise them how to get into the exchanges, and if they don't want to do that immediately, they'll be able to take a packet with them. Our hope is that a lot of these folks will actually get involved and have health care for the first time. Many prisoners have drug and alcohol problems, mental health issues, and if they do actually have insurance and can treat some of these issues on the outside, hopefully it will have a positive impact on the recidivism rate. This is all speculation. That's the warden's hope, and I convey that. We'll see what happens when it's actually implemented. Thank you very much.
Now we are going to hear from Charles Proctor, who is a senior managing partner of Proctor and Lindsay. He is also an allied attorney with Alliance Defending Freedom. He serves frequently as an expert witness in state and federal courts, and Mr. Proctor was lead counsel in the seminal case of Conestoga Wood Specialties versus Sebelius in Federal District Court and the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, which is now being heard by the U.S. Supreme Court.
Thank you, Anna. I have 5 minutes to talk about something that I could spend 2 hours with you, so bear with me if I speed along here. I want to tell you a story about a local family, a family in Lancaster County, the Hahns. The Hahns are Mennonites. And 50 years ago in July, Mr. Hahn Sr., in the garage behind his house, started a woodworking business. He Started the business, he capitalized it, he incorporated it, and he and his brother worked it. Today, 50 years later, the Hahn family are the sole stockholders, they are the board of directors, and they are the managers of the company. Interestingly enough, in a recent tour of the factory, as we were going through, one of the workers was sweeping the floor and picking up the trash, and Mr. Hahn's son, who's now the CEO, called this employee over and wanted to introduce him to a team of lawyers that were going through the plant. It was the grandson of the founder of the company sweeping the floor after school, which he does 4 days a week. This is a closely held family company. It's the foundation of what our country's all about. However, as an offshoot of the ACA, Health and Human Services dictated to the Hahns through a regulation, not legislation, and that's an important distinction in the law, that they must provide contraception, abortifacient contraception, which is contraception that will kill a fertilized embryo, and counseling to their employees at the employer's sole cost. No cost sharing, no co-pays, no deductibles, at their sole cost. The Hahns are deeply religious people. They do not believe in any form of taking of a human life. They're pacifists. They don't even believe in capital punishment. This was entirely offensive to them that they would have to provide this service to their employees. Meanwhile, during the 50 years of their existence, they had grown to about 1,000 employees. They had provided a very comprehensive and very generous health plan, one of the best. It kept them competitive in the marketplace. As a result, they have employees that work there for over 30 years, 35 years, 40 years. But now they had a choice. The government had placed a choice on them. Do they violate their religious conscience, which is guaranteed by the First Amendment and by successive legislation enacted by our Congress, namely the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, RFRA, and our LUPA, the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act? Do they violate their religious conscience, which is protected, or do they face ruinous fines to their business? And when I say ruinous, $100 per day per employee times 1,000 employees is $100,000 a day, or $35 million a year. What's their choice? And this is what the government argued at the Supreme Court last Tuesday. Well, why don't you just drop your health plan and pay the $2,000 fine? That's only $200,000 or $2 million a year instead of $35 million. It's a ploy by the government to get the Hahns to drop that generous insurance plan, which keeps them competitive in the marketplace, which is something that they've provided for their clients or for their employees all along. Now, when they incorporated, they did not have in mind religious liberty. They incorporated for two reasons. Tax reasons. They're a sub-S corporation. All the profits and all the losses pass through to the Hahns individually, and obviously liability issues. That's all incorporation was. Now, all of a sudden, the government wants to make it a religious issue as well and say, even though they've exempted 180 million Americans from this mandate, they want to say that because the Hahns make money, they can't take advantage of that exemption. There was an initial issue in this case, which was, can a secular or for-profit corporation exercise their religious conscience through their business, a closely held business? The government says no. We say fundamentally yes. Can that corporation exercise free speech? Can individuals exercise free speech through the corporation? Does the corporation have standing even to bring this matter into a courtroom? In preparing for the Supreme Court, we identified 35 different issues from the one mandate that could be affected by this. And in closing, in my opening statement here, I'd like to remind all of you that this is going to impact all of you that have a closely held business, all of you as individuals, and all of you that believe in the freedom of exercise of your religious conscience and your rights of free speech. Thank you.
And now we're going to hear from Elizabeth Stelle, a senior policy analyst for the Commonwealth Foundation for Public Policy Alternatives. Elizabeth has researched and written on government reform, healthcare, welfare, energy, and government transparency. Elizabeth is a graduate of the Koch Associates Program and earned a bachelor's degree in history from Grove City College.
You can see me over the podium, right? Just making sure. Okay. Thank you, Anna. She threatened to include something very embarrassing in my bio, but I guess I have to tell you now because it is pretty funny. I own it, yeah. Because of what I've written a lot on Medicaid expansion, particularly in the healthcare law. And there's a lot of people in Pennsylvania who are very upset with some of the points that I've been making, namely that it's immoral to put people in a broken system. And so I've been named the third worst Pennsylvanian 3 times in a row, I think, for my blog on that. So we got a kick out of that. So I'm like, yeah, I guess we're doing something right. I wanted to take a little different tack today and talk to you about something that I hope you can use in your conversations with your family and your friends. I know if you're like me, Obamacare comes up at every Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter, and there's always some sort of political debate that ensues. So wherever you happen to be when you run into people that have maybe a different viewpoint, I wanted to give you something very simple that you can tell them to help them understand why Obamacare is not the solution to our healthcare crisis, and then what is the solution, what is the alternative? Because to simply say we need to replace it is not good enough. You have to give people something tangible. So 2 things you can focus on to help people understand that the law is not working. Quality and affordability. That's what every American wants in their health insurance, and that's what we were promised under the Affordable Care Act. For quality, I just want to tell you a story that I think drives the point home. I have a colleague at the Commonwealth Foundation named Priya, and Priya has a pre-existing condition. She was uninsured before the Affordable Care Act came into effect with the exchanges because her health insurance was just astronomical. It was cheaper for her to remain uninsured. Well, Priya looked at the plans on the exchange, and she finally, with a very heavy heart, went ahead and signed up for a plan, thinking, I don't really support this law, but at least now I'm covered and I have some financial peace of mind. Not so fast. Priya went to get a prescription refilled for her pre-existing condition. This is a prescription that she needs to function on a daily basis. Her pharmacist told her that he could not fill the prescription because she needed prior authorization under her new insurance plan. It's been almost a month, and Priya still has not received prior authorization for her prescription. She's had to survive on samples that her doctor's office has donated to her, and she's had to driven over 50 miles just to get those free samples. That is not quality care. Priya is exactly the type of person that Obamacare was passed to help, and it's failing her. Affordability. That's pretty straightforward. We have lots of numbers, stats, and statistics that show us healthcare is becoming more expensive, let alone declining in costs. And I don't want to go through all of those. A lot of great numbers have already been thrown out today. And if we want to get into those in questions, we can. But suffice to say, it's not getting cheaper, it's getting more expensive. And get ready because it's just going to get worse. So what are some of the solutions? What do we talk about in terms of how we can replace Obamacare? I would argue that you really have to look to the states. Maybe I'm biased because I work for a state-based think tank, but I really think states have the ability to solve our health care problems. A couple of things that we could do, reinsurance or high-risk pools for people like Priya that are considered uninsurable or are very expensive to insure. That's a much more targeted way at addressing people with pre-existing conditions than destroying the entire marketplace and charging over a dozen different taxes, fees, you name it. Price transparency, it's tricky to implement, but that's something that needs to be discussed and looked at. Mandate relief. Why should the government tell you what your insurance plan has to cover? That should be a choice you make We need more choice in terms of what our insurance actually provides. And then Medicaid reform, which is what I spend a lot of time on. How do we actually create a system that helps the most vulnerable among us instead of trapping them in a cycle of poverty that doesn't deliver quality care, that makes them, that treats them not as capable people able to make their own healthcare decisions? That is really, in my opinion, the tragedy of this law, is that it does nothing to help the very people that we said we are going to help. And in fact, it makes it worse by throwing more people into the Medicaid system where there's already a shortage of providers. So those are just a couple of practical points that I hope you can use next time this topic comes up in your daily living. And I look forward to answering any questions you have, particularly about Medicaid expansion or Healthy PA and anything that's going on in the Pennsylvania realm considering the Affordable Care Act.
Look at all these questions. Thank you. We're going to start with Lisa. We have a couple questions regarding the healthcare compact. How many states have approved the compact? Are there any healthcare compact resolutions in DC? And can you briefly explain the people power of the healthcare compact?
People power, sure. Okay. Can I sit?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Well, then people can't see me. I'll get up. I don't think. Maybe you could just ask me them again.
Okay, we'll start with this one. How many states have approved the healthcare compact?
8 states have approved the healthcare compact, and that means that the governor has signed them. Pennsylvania is not one of them. 3 have passed, but not approved by the governor, and 9 have bills. 9 have bills that are waiting to be passed.
Okay. Are there any healthcare compact resolutions in the House in D.C.?
Yes, there is. It is Representative James Lanford, a Republican, Oklahoma. He is the chairman of the House Republican Committee. He has introduced the House Joint Resolution legislative proposal for the healthcare compact. If anybody wants to know, it's HJ Resolution 110. So that answers everybody's question. There was another one.
And can you briefly explain the people power of the healthcare compact?
The people power, it's all of you. We need all of you. The people power is everyone in here, and between you and your doctors. You need to take charge of your health care. You cannot, please let the federal government do this. It's up to every one of you. That's my answer. So.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. This is for Congressman English. I recently spoke to a CEO of a large, not myself, but this person who wrote this question, recently spoke to a CEO of a large health network. He indicated to survive, hospitals will either close or become part of a huge 200 to 300 hospital system. With this said, where do you see hospitals heading?
Many hospitals actually supported the change, but there was an understanding that the ACA was actually going to control costs in the process. What we're afraid of is that over time, with the reimbursement cuts that are built into this, without the corresponding cost savings, either the federal government is going to be forced to spend a great deal more, or there's going to have to be a level of rationing, which is going to force many institutions that have any sort of redundancy to be rethought. And hospital closings are not out of reach. I don't want to overstate that. We work very closely at Aaron Fox with the hospital community, but the fact is it's very hard to make these numbers work. The ACA, for all of its additional $1 trillion in taxes, is funded in a significant part by diverting a lot of resources out of existing programs and in the process making them very, very hard to sustain. And I think it is fair to say we will see many hospital systems and many networks put under enormous stress by these changes.
Great. This one is for Mr. Farrell. The fees and changes to benefits which you have spoken, do these policies apply similarly in all counties of Pennsylvania?
I believe so. I do know that they would apply to any county government, and there's 67 different counties in Pennsylvania. There's about 3,100 counties in the United States. In Pennsylvania, we've got two forms of government, county commissioner form where there's 3 commissioners, and then there's also a home rule form of government. I know in the county system they would apply. I'm unsure whether they would apply specifically in the amounts that I have mentioned for example, Philadelphia, Allegheny County, and some of the other home rule counties.
Great, thank you. We have a couple for Mr. Proctor. Can you believe it? Is the Hahn case part of the Hobby Lobby effort? Could you clarify that? And how soon will the case be decided? If favorable, what can we expect?
First of all, Hobby Lobby and Conestoga were consolidated, which is an unusual move by the Supreme Court. You see that on occasion, but not very often. As a result, we were granted extra oral argument time at the court, and the briefing was rather extensive. And the issues are basically the same. Both the Greens at Hobby Lobby and the Hahns at Conestoga do not object to contraception per se. It's the abortifacient part that is so objectionable to them. But the mandate covers all 3, contraception, abortifacient contraception, and the counseling. So it goes together as one package. We expect a decision by June 30th. It might be the week before, but we're assured of having that decision. The judges actually voted last Friday at their lunch meeting and decided who was going to write the majority opinion and the dissent. But during the next 3 months before the decision is announced, the judges exchange their opinions. They have further discussion. Votes can change. So until the opinion is actually announced, it is not finalized. I felt, having been there and sitting right there in the front row with Paul Clement, who argued the case for us. Paul Clement, by the way, is a former U.S. Solicitor General. It was his 73rd time in front of the United States Supreme Court. Quite experienced, obviously. I felt that the case went very well. The government had no answer. The government could not, twice did not answer Justice Breyer, and once did not answer Justice Roberts, which is just bad form, if nothing else. But they don't have an answer for why a corporation can't exercise religion, why free speech and exercise of religion should be stifled in this manner. So I'm feeling very confident, but by the same token, in Eastern District Court and Third Circuit, the ruling was against us. The interesting part is, over of the 60 cases that were filed, there are about 25 decisions granting an injunction against the mandate, and only 4 or 5, one of Conestoga is one of them, that ruled against us. So the overwhelming majority of the circuit courts believe that this mandate should be struck down. The decision, because of the many implications for corporations, for individuals, for free speech, freedom of religion, the constitutional issues, the decision could be very, very interesting. And the big question is what we call the slippery slope. And very quickly, and I know you've got other questions there, the slippery slope is, well, what if somebody objects to a vaccine or a transfusion? What do you do then? And what do you do about bigger corporations that aren't closely held, an IBM or an Exxon? What do you do about them? Well, the IBM Exxon question is pretty easy. With thousands and thousands of stockholders, what we call attenuation, or the removal of the management from the employees, et cetera, is pretty significant. But the issue of, if you don't believe in a particular medical procedure or some other thing that the government may mandate, whether it's through regulation or by legislation, that's going to be a big issue. And that question has been on the table since day one.
Great. This one is for Elizabeth. What are the implications for Pennsylvania if we do not expand? Now, the question says Medicare. I believe they mean Medicaid. Can you explain a little difference between the two and then answer the question, what are the implications?
Yeah. So Medicare is for retired folks. Medicaid is for the poor and the disabled. Most of the people in Medicaid are moms and kids, but most of the cost comes from disabled folks. What are the implications if we do not expand? It means we save a lot of money. But more important than that, more important than any dollar amount, is that it means we're not putting more people into a failed system. We have the ability to keep pushing for more flexibility for our Medicaid patients, which is what we really need to improve health care for them. Because right now they have very little choice, they have very little say in the type of care they receive, they have a very difficult time finding specialists. It's just a broken system. It's, I would argue, the worst form of health insurance in the United States of America. So to put more people in that system is immoral, and we need to do everything in our power to make sure that our lawmakers understand that it's not just a fiscal issue. There is no free money from Washington, D.C. Everyone pays taxes, whether you're a Pennsylvanian, Ohioan. It's just tax dollars. And so it's again, it's not just a financial issue. It's a moral issue.
Back to Congressman English. With a bill so bad, how did business, or why does business not fight back? Why hasn't the insurance business not lobbied against a bill that will put them out of business? What thoughts on an insurance bailout or fix?
That's a very interesting question because there were major parts of the business community, there are major parts of the healthcare sector that supported the ACA. It was pulled together as a compromise which had the support of many of those industries that were going to be regulated, that were going to be taxed, that were going to be restricted. And the answer is there was some sense that some of the compromises that they achieved were going to provide a short-term benefit or at least an avoidance of a bigger problem for some of the associations involved. I think you almost have to pose that question to individual companies or associations, but I think it's also worth noting many large corporations have traditionally supported a national system of health care. We saw that during the Clinton years. We saw many major corporate players come on board and reach out and argue for essentially a shift in the current situation because their costs as employers providing these health benefits, and in many cases these some of the best plans available are available through some of the larger corporate entities. The cost was making them uncompetitive, so they were willing to make a deal that would move things in the right direction. Don't hesitate to believe that there are some in the corporate community who, in the end, might be willing to support something like single payer. Although in the end, I've been intrigued at how many companies have pulled back when their human relations department has looked at the implications of the kind of regulation you see in Obamacare and also the consequences of an even more deeply nationalized and regulated program. The loss of control to them of their costs is potentially very, very substantial. So you've asked a wonderfully sensitive question, which ought to be asked more often, including by many of the corporate officers.
Terence, you said that prisoners will be able to enter the exchanges leaving prison. How many in your county prison does that make up, that number?
Well, we have about 950 prisoners. If they're going to serve a longer sentence, then they go to state prison that's usually over about a year. So folks who are serving under a year sentence, or in some cases 2-year sentences, will be, when they're eligible for parole, will be eligible to join or opt into the exchange. I'm not sure exactly the number per year that leaves the prison.
Okay, okay. Mr. Proctor, this is a little bit off the actual topic of Obamacare, but what are we to do when the liberal courts deny the U.S. Constitution?
Well, we have to remember that the Constitution comes first. And the Constitution created those courts. And fundamentally, and technically, it's a combination. We did not file our complaint under the First Amendment, but we used REFRA, the Religious Restoration Freedom Act. And we did that on purpose. That was a technique that we used in order to use existing legislation which was backed up by the Constitution. But the concept here is what came first? The First Amendment. And I've gotten a little bit of flack for this, but during my oral argument in the Third Circuit with Judge Cohn, he brought up the grammatical aspect of the First Amendment. And if you've ever looked at it, you'll notice that freedom of speech, the Establishment Clause, and free speech, and exercise of religion, excuse me, are all in the same paragraph, separated by a semicolon. And a semicolon suggests a pause. Now, the founders did not create 3 separate amendments. They did not create 3 separate paragraphs. They did not create even 3 separate sentences. They had them all together. Now, what we have here is the government in this particular situation, and in many others, as we heard from the previous speaker talking about the EPA, imposing their view of what our society and our culture should look like. And I believe that we have to go back to that fundamental concept of exercising your freedom of religion. You know, the United States Supreme Court has a real problem here. They have already said that the least infringement on your religious conscience for the shortest period of time is too much. And in a very famous case known as Yoder, and there are countless cases, there's a family, an Amish family from Wisconsin, that was fined $5. A one-time $5 fine that went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said that was too much. So here we're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars of fines that would put people out of business. And Anna, if I may, that $2,000 fine, if you don't provide health insurance, what's that designed to do? That's designed to let the government step in and take the place of the private insurance. A very subtle but distinct issue that I think is part of the government's agenda.
Great. Lisa, back on the healthcare compact, which legislators in the PA General Assembly support the compact, and if they don't, why?
None of them supported the healthcare compact.
Short and sweet.
Yes.
Why?
Oh, I'm going to get in trouble for this.
You want to rethink this?
No.
Okay.
I'll be honest. Early on, when we talked to the governor's office, ooh, I'm in trouble. We were told that it wasn't on the agenda. So, okay. And then we went to another legislator, and he talked about how we receive the money. And we would get a grant from the government, from the federal government, but it's your tax dollars that would come back to the United States. I mean, come back to Pennsylvania. So that was one of the other issues, but that was it. So we haven't talked to that. We haven't been back to the governor's office yet. But if you're out there, I'm coming back, and we're also going back to that other legislator too. So
Great. Okay.
watch out.
And last question for Elizabeth. Obamacare enrollment, 7 million signed up, a population of about 300 million. Are the citizens really insured, signed up, or paid up?
Your guess is as good as mine. I mean, we really don't know at this point. There are surveys. There are people out there doing different forms of complex calculations to try to figure out how many people are actually insured. But the questionnaire brings up a good point. We don't know how many people have paid, so you really don't have insurance until you've paid. We don't really know how many people have actually bought a plan. I mean, the HHS numbers, you have to remember, just count how many people have a plan in their cart. They haven't actually clicked the purchase button, you could say. So we don't even really know how many people are in the process of purchasing a plan. And, again, what are they really getting for their plans? Can we even call it health insurance if they're not able to get the prescriptions they need, the doctors they need, the hospitals they need? I mean, what good is a card if you can't get access to care, right? So I'm concerned that a lot of these exchange plans are going to go down the road of the Medicaid plan, where you're going to see reimbursements continually go down because insurance companies can't raise premiums, and you're going to see the quality of care go down, and we're going to end up with exactly the opposite of what we were promised under the legislation. So stay tuned. We will see.
And with that, help me thank all of these wonderful panelists for giving their thoughts today. Thank you for coming.